let's talk about a very, very important topic. Let's talk about who is supposed to drive the impact, who's really, forcing impact. And with impact, I think we also mean sustainability. Should it be from the board? Should it be from somewhere else? And like I just announced, we have wonderful women on board. You see, we are different generations. I think we have very different backgrounds. So let me just introduce you very quickly. Agatha, you are the director of the Generation Climate Europe, but, and I think that's very important to say, you help organizations introduce youth boards in order to drive sustainability. So I'm very, very happy to have you on stage, and I'm really curious to hear your view.
Thank you.
Then we have Alexis. She's a former board member, former CSO of Arcadis and also Adidas. So we're going to hear what you were doing and what's going to be your new function and what your experience is. And then Ssonja, actually we've known each other for quite a long time in different functions. And I'm very proud to have you here because you're a designated board member of GLS Bank. I think a lot of people know GLS, a truly purpose-driven bank. Also happy to have your perspectives.
Thank you.
So to kick it off, I'm just going to ask you, and the people who've joined this morning, it's practically the same question. What is your narrative looking at this topic? What is your statement? What is your belief? So we can start to discuss. And Agatha, just give us a quick view of what is your view at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks a lot for having us here. I think something that's really interesting to look at is, especially in the last few years, the development of alternative structures for boards. So we're looking at putting nature on boards, but also in particular what I do, which is helping companies and organizations set up youth advisory boards. I've been on different boards myself for nonprofits, for institutions, and for other organizations. And I think something I've seen is that fundamental misunderstanding of what does it mean to take decisions in a way that allows different perspectives to be there, and what does it mean to take decisions in a structure that isn't necessarily the one that we're used to have just because that's what the system says, right? So we're not interested into looking at, what is out there and what we have been doing for many decades, but I think introducing not only youth advisory boards as a means for innovation, but also youth advisory boards as a structure that allows us to bring really into the company's operations and activities intergenerational justice itself. So really looking at, okay, how are we using board structures as a means to drive long-term impacts?
So it's changing the narrative, actually.
In a way, changing the narrative, yeah.
Okay. Alexis.
I think maybe I could come a little from, my background is quite strange and quite varied in terms of I was working first on sneakers, Adidas, then buildings and infrastructure at Arcadis, and now actually with private equity and some of those private companies. So I'm seeing it from a lot of different angles. And what I can say is that one of the biggest advantages you can have as this trend is coming forward, you're seeing a lot more requests for sustainability experience in board members. So actually having board members who have had a career in this topic to bring in a perspective that they might not otherwise hear. You also wind up seeing a lot of companies setting up sustainability committees on their board. And then there's the interesting interplay about how all of the topics that one handles within a board interact with the different committees. Everything from audit to, the most interesting thing is with sustainability committees, they tend to touch every topic that the board comes in on. The biggest change I am starting to see is not only an awareness of how core it is to the company's business offering, service offering, new products. It's essentially an understanding very slowly is coming, but that it's not that you have strategy anymore and a sustainability strategy. It's that your sustainability strategy is your strategy. Essentially, you just need to plan for the world that's coming. We now know what that world looks like. And there's some people who know a bit better, have more detail on how fast it's changing, on what kind of changes are coming. And boards are looking for that kind of expertise. I do have to say there's varied levels of awareness at how fast the pace of change is. And I've never yet seen a board who is fully aware of how fast this change is coming. So in that sense, I would say there's still a little progress to become, but that's positive signs.
So for you, it's about speed and catching up with the speed and keeping the speed?
It's about both the speed, the awareness, and then I have to say it's about integrating it into your core product and service and growth.
Okay.
That's a real change.
So Ssonja, I mean, you're purpose-driven. Sustainability runs through your veins in the business model. What is your narrative on top of that?
Yes, at first I totally agree with the women speaking before me, because what I want to say is that there don't has to be a strategy for sustainability, and then the strategy for the business model. So it has to be one, and therefore, yes, as a purpose-driven company, I would say define what you do and define what you don't do, and then make it measurable and transparent. This is the simplest thing that everybody can follow what you're doing, and at first define what you do and what you don't do. So in our business, for example, we have a very simple business model. We just finance basic needs. There are 6 sectors. We are financing mobility, we are financing health, agriculture, so all the basic needs. And then in these sectors, we define what we are doing and what we're not doing. For example, in agriculture, we just finance biological agriculture. So, and therefore we know, and our customers know what we don't finance, and then we make it transparent on quarterly basis. We make very transparent which loans we gave to which sector and in which amount. And we have the agreement with our customers that we are allowed to do it. And so it becomes kind of in talks with our customers, becomes a kind of certificate. Yes, we have a loan from GLS Bank, and that shows that we are really on the right way. And this is what yes, I can advise is say what you want to do, what you don't want to do, make it transparent and make it measurable.
Transparency and measurable. I like it. So when we look at the youth boards, I love the idea. If I look back to where I'm coming from, who I've worked for, I'm not sure it's an idea that would be easy to implement and follow through. What are the burdens, and how do you take the burdens?
So I think there are 2 things to unpack there. First of all, there are more and more companies, there are more and more nonprofits, there are more and more international organizations that are setting up youth advisory boards. You can call them panels, councils, committees, hubs, whatever you want. But essentially the idea is there, right? So this is happening. There is a very strong interest into setting them up, and I think there should be even more interest into how to do them meaningfully. So it's exactly what you're referring to, right? I mean, how do we actually do this so that it makes sense, so that it's not just another youth washing mechanism that I see all the time, we fight all the time, but it really something that can genuinely make a difference. And I think there are a couple of components there to bear in mind. So number 1 is an internal buy-in on this, an internal vision on, okay, why are we doing this? What is the purpose behind it? And an understanding from either the board, or it can also be the CEO or both, on the fact that there needs to be a structure like that set up. So that's number 1, because if you have people coming in, whether it's externally or internally, and then the company itself doesn't really know why they did this, it's very unclear for people who are supposed to advise on this, on how are they actually doing this. So that's number 1. Number 2, I think what's also really important when it comes to making sure that this is meaningful is being mindful of who are the people that you typically attract, both within your corporate structures, but also as customers, and who are the people that you're not hearing. So who are the voices that you're not reaching? Who are the voices that you're more interested to reach? And this is where we can talk about diversity, we can talk about representation, we can talk about making it local, global, international, etc. There are many different formats depending on circumstances. But I think the whole purpose behind is that you're setting it up because you're interested in this as a means of innovation. If you're interested in this as a means of innovation, that means you need to be able to be okay with being uncomfortable. And that means you need to be able to have perspectives and views that make you potentially uncomfortable. And I mean this in the most positive way possible, right? Like, you want there to be people that will sit down and they'll say, well, actually, why are you doing it this way? And then you'll think, well, there's just this assumption that I've had for a long time, right? So that's number two, being aware of the structure and being aware who are you bringing to the table. And number three is making sure that when it is an advisory structure, it actually is an advisory structure. So you're very clear on what do you want that advice on, what do you want the strategic perspectives on. It doesn't mean you have to agree to everything. It just means there needs to be transparency as to what are you taking on and what are you not taking on and why. So it's really that idea of if you want to make sure that there is a meaningful connection with decision-making processes, there needs to be clarity and there needs to be transparency on what are these decisions that you're taking and why. And I think these are the three components that you might think, well, that sounds easy, are super difficult for many people to incorporate. And that's also why, I do what I do and I work with different organizations and companies because I've seen how it works in the inside. And it's very often not so much the lack of intention to set it up in a meaningful way, but it's just a lack of understanding of what are the components that are needed to actually make it happen and make it happen in a way that works for the company, because that's what we want, right? We want it to be a beneficial addition to the existing structure that allows for the company to take decisions differently, to take decisions in a more inclusive, in a more innovative, in a more future-proof way.
So actually, it's about being bold on one hand,
Yeah.
but also being a little bit uncomfortable for everybody. And I think that's part of the role of a CSO as well. Alexis, from your
You're
experience,
a good CSO. So I don't know if you want us to be jumping
Please.
in while and talking to each
Please.
other, but I did have to agree with you in saying one of the most important things, good strategy is saying what you are going to do, and more importantly, what you're not going to do. And therefore, saying what you're not going to do is going to make a lot of people uncomfortable, because usually it's easier to say, we will do that, yes, and, and then there's not enough time, frankly, to get all these things done. So one of the values I think a CSO can bring, there are different ways company have set up their company and how their CSO perhaps interacts with their board or leads their sustainability committee on their board. And it matters a lot where you will put your CSO in the organization. There are plenty of companies that put them in legal, that put them in perhaps finance. And what you know there, or sometimes marketing, that will often be telling which is the most important thing I want you to focus on. You have all the other things, but you want to focus on that. I was very lucky in the sense in my roles that I was always based in the core. Well, at Adidas, it was in the brand, so that's in the core business of the company. In Arcadis, it was growth. I was part of the executive leadership team in growth. And that's, if you do that, then it also says, what is the most important priority for us as a company with sustainability? And then your job is, as a CSO, is to start engaging with all those topics and say, well, then how could we be better at making this part of our core business? And I know there was, on your previous panel, you were talking about actually the challenges between having a green growth model, a degrowth model. These are sometimes terms that have never been heard in boardrooms. People haven't heard them yet. You need to introduce people to these topics. You also need to say, okay, well, why do we think we could create decoupled growth, green growth, or we could pivot our company, and how would we do that? And who could we bring in from the outside who would help us be able to create some of those new business lines, help us pivot? Those are things that I would hope that most CSOs take as given in their jobs. In the future, you may not have CSOs if we've really turned a good corner and been able to so integrate it into the core of the business. Unfortunately, from what I'm seeing, there's going to be CSOs for a while now.
I think we're going to need them at the moment, definitely. Ssonja, I mean, you've had different roles, and before joining GLS in your function now, you also saw different companies and how they're implementing sustainability. Looking back, if you'd known what you know now, what would be your advice to other board colleagues, other board members? What should they do just to drive the change and to speed up the change? We've been talking a lot about speed today as well.
Oh, well, that's a difficult question because I'm now in a purpose-driven company, and it is we don't need a CSO because from the bottom line and the top line, it is our business model to act and act in this way. And on the other side, we need some responsible person who manages the regulatory, because it is the same for us than for any other company, because we don't have the data they want from us, and we are deeply green in our heart, and we are. Well, we are 1.5 degree compatible in our portfolio, in our company, but we need some person who is responsible to take this, for example, regulatory office. So it is if I look back, I would say, if you pick somebody up who is responsible for this topic, don't see it like a checklist he or she has to work with. And it is not an add-on theme. It is the course theme to transform yourself, and you have to honestly want it. Yes, and it sounds a bit like an appel, and that makes it for me so difficult to answer. And what I maybe would recommend, because I really like it in our company, is to make that happen, that it is a bottom-up and a top-down process, and it's deeply in the DNA, or becomes deeply part of the DNA. You have to open communication rooms, because the way is so much changing, and the change happens in the gray zone. As I told you, we have Anlage- und Finanzierungsgrundsätze, so things what we do in investing and giving loans, and things what we don't do, or rules. But the real world happens in the gray zone. For example, we say what we do in agriculture. We just give loans and we just invest in biological agriculture. So and now we have a question for a loan for vertical farming, which maybe can heal the the world hunger in an innovation way. So we have, and this is the real world, is in the gray zone, and change happens there. And therefore we have every Friday a council in cross-functional people, bottom up, top down driven, and everybody has the same voice and the same weight in his or her voice. And there we talk about such questions we have to decide. And we have to decide then, are we doing it, or can't we do it without giving up our purpose and our principles? And yes.
May I?
So what you asked, yes, in a summary, maybe yes, open communication rooms. It don't has to be a topic which happens in just one room and in the responsibility for just one person.
So we talked a little bit about governance. Do you want to add something, or you? Go ahead.
May I say something that's perhaps a little controversial
Please do.
and sort of respectfully engage with one of your previous statements, which is we need somebody who helps us handle the regulatory side. That is a huge topic in every boardroom right now, and anybody, no matter where you are in the world. As you can tell from my accent, I'm originally American. I've lived in Germany for many years. And now with the advent of CSRD, it is the top of most European boards' awareness, but there's also regulation coming for disclosure in California. This is definitely a topic that has the board attention, and I think it has the board's attention in exactly the wrong way. And it's because there was great intention. We need to actually have the data and the disclosures to be able to make good decisions. But it has become a checklist. And even to the point where I think it was just a week ago, the EU Commission, one of the men who leads this topic within the EU Commission, made a statement saying, I hope companies will take a pragmatic approach, particularly SMEs, and a reasonable approach when it comes to legislation around this. And for God's sake, may it please not be the core job of what your CSO does. If anything, maybe help you understand what the legislation is coming up, what's the motivation behind it, how to interpret how it's coming in. But we have functions that help us already deal with regulation. We have functions that help us deal with accounting. We have board committees that help us deal with that. And so if anything, your CSO can help you engage with that topic to make it integrated into your business. But if anything, that should not be the core focus ever of what you're talking about when you're talking about sustainability in a boardroom. And right now, this year particularly, from what I hear from many boards, it is often the loudest thing talked about and sometimes the only thing talked about.
Absolutely. So actually was a question I'm going to ask. Additionally to the reporting, I always have a feeling it's a topic of risk mitigation. So let's try to find the easiest way. I know I'm being a little bit bold and a little bit touchy now. Let's find the easiest way to get the thing done without, too much impact, too much costs, and so on. Looking at the question, who's going to drive it? Is it going to be the board? Is it going to be the youth board? Is it going to be everybody? What's your opinion looking at the time? Let's just go a little bit deeper. Who do we need? Who do we really need? Agatha?
I think that's a really big question, but I think this is also where, and I touched upon that a little bit, I wanted to bring up something which I don't think is talked about enough, which is that intergenerational representation. So when you look at, so currently we have around half of the world, a little bit less than half of the world is under 30, right? But the average age for the boards in most corporations is around 60. And I'm not saying here that, we bring in the youth and we solve the problem. I really don't like that narrative. I think that's a very false narrative, which just puts people in boxes. But I think what this is really about is about that radical collaboration. And we can apply these principles of thinking about radical collaborations throughout the structures that we have, whether existing structures or the structures that we want. I think this is what's extremely important because you need to think here about, okay, what is the added value that we're bringing from the different perspectives? And I think this is where what you talked about before when it comes to the role of the board comes in. It's not just about the regulatory compliance. It's about thinking beyond that. And I think this is where a lot of the people would come into this kind of a stop of saying, well, yes, but we have to do that. Hence, this is the must, right? So this is the bottom line. This is what's going always to be on the agenda. So we just have to make sure that this is being done. And I think that's where that idea of, bigger thinking of what is our role as a company, what is our role in the larger system comes in, and really understanding the responsibility that a lot of companies or organizations have in that context. I think that's what's really important when we talk about the different roles that we're assigning, that this goes all the way from individuals to the structures that we have, to the structures and the way they interact with each other, and to the bigger system.
So who is it?
Sorry.
Who is it?
I think it's a combination of the structures that you can bring in, which allows for different generations to express their different perspectives.
But there needs to be a justification from the board?
I think there needs to be a desire for the board to be more than just that compliance structure.
I love it. Okay. What's your view, Alexis?
So before I started in business, I had no idea what a supervisory board did. And sometimes people I know who've worked in business for years still ask themselves, what is the supervisory board there for? You have your supervisory board, you have your executive management team. Your supervisory board is there to advise and to, they are the boss of the CEO, but not to drive the company, but rather to help the company focus on what it's the most important thing, make sure it doesn't miss things, and really to help counsel those on the executive management team. So I have been lucky enough in my career to have seen what good leadership looks like when you have it in an executive management team, especially when you have charismatic good leadership at the top. It's an incredible thing to have because the organization all of a sudden moves with a level of momentum that it doesn't have otherwise. It's inspired to move. In my own experience, the way that comes up is often bottom up. You start to feel within an organization how antsy people are, ready, impatient, like on your previous panel, to get something done, to get moving. Everybody's impatient at the pace. Now, what could be the perfect use of the supervisory board is to bring that in a constructive way, engage in a safe way with the executive management team. So be that bridge between the bottom and the top down. And then also to challenge when you don't have particularly charismatic nor focused leadership from the top, to actually help insist that you get it at the top of a company, if only for the fact that you will get better talent, you will get more creative ideas, you will have people be coming up with the products and services that will be the ones that work in the new economy, because frankly, the old ones are not fit for purpose. And so if I had to come down to, is it bottom up, top down? You get a lot of movement and a lot of momentum from bottom up, but it doesn't go anywhere unless you have the support from the top down. You get a certain level of momentum, but it can never break through to a level of true transformation and actually market driving power. So you need the top down, I think.
Okay. Well, I'm pretty sure we know what Ssonja's going to say. I know you guys are driving it from the board, of course, justified from the board. So looking at the time, Ssonja, what would be the one thing if everybody has their own job, but what can we change coming back? What would you advise really to take into action and try to push the change and the transformation and maybe get the board moved? Do you have an idea? Do you want to give something to the audience?
At first, be honest. And at second, ask yourself, would you make this decision also in 10 years? Beam yourself up in 10 years further, and then ask yourself, would it be the same decision?
Agatha?
Yeah, I love the idea of that long-term thinking. I think this is also what we touched upon a little bit in the previous panel, but I think this is really radically what's missing a lot of the times, and honestly in a lot of different contexts of decision making. I mean, we see the same thing in policy making, the idea of, well, we're going to have decision makers taking short-term decisions that are good for the mandate, but not necessarily long-term transformational decisions. So I think this is the same in the context of when we talk about boards, when we talk about decision making in organizations, because it comes down to what is the purpose that you serve in that structure, right? Yes, it's about compliance, it's about making sure that the rules are followed, etc. But it's really also about seeing, okay, in a long term, what is the added value that you're bringing? And I think this is where the role of business is so important to understand, because when it comes to the composition of the board, you need to have, like you said, you need to have bold people. You need to have leaders who are not afraid to speak up, who are not afraid to challenge the narrative, who are not afraid to say, wait a second, why are we even doing it like this? Are we really doing this because it makes sense, or are we just doing this because somebody wrote this down in procedures a long time ago, and we're just following the procedures? And I think this is really what's so important. That yes, it comes down to that individual drive, but it also comes down to structures that allow for this to happen.
Alexis.
Everybody in this room is either somebody who's making decisions right now already within their organization, or could get close to somebody who is. So you were saying, what could we all do when we go home? Get close to this. If you're not the one making the decisions, get close to the person who is. And if you're young, go ask them to be your mentor. If you're not young, go ask them to be your mentor. Go ask them for a 15-minute coffee. Get close to the people who are going to be making the decisions, because honestly, they don't always hear all the perspectives.
Yeah.
And then also you might not know why they're not making different decisions because you're not close to them. If you feel strongly about making change, I think it was on your previous panel where they were saying, go out and do something. Well, go out and get in somebody's ear And if anything, what you can do is once you shift one person, particularly if you shift one decision maker, it has such a ripple effect. And you would be surprised if you go up to someone and say, if you would be so kind, I would just like to have 15 minutes of your time, one mentoring conversation, one quick, people will take 15 minutes of time. And that's an open door, and then they're going to take the next 15 minutes of time. So make sure you keep bringing people useful, interesting information, but go get close to someone because they need to hear this.